Welcome to the Sound of Movement podcast. We're kicking off a week of assessments. We're going to be talking about how and why you and when you should be doing assessments. And today's show is all about how imbalances affect performance. So you're going to want to stick around to this one to make sure you're performing optimally.
Good morning, everybody. It is Monday morning here in Sydney, Australia, and I have my radio voice on.
Yes, you do.
Welcome to the Super Sounds of Movement
If this is the
podcast.
first time you've joined us, my name is Yanni Bormeister. Across the road from me, across the table from we're off to a good start. Across the table from me is my brother Rad. Behind the mixer is the voice of God, the sexiest man in the room.
The most sexist man in the room.
The sexiest
Classic
man in
Richie.
the room.
The biggest dick
Richard
we've
Lellies.
ever met.
And next to me is our resident physiotherapist and the founder of ADP Physio, who
ADPT.
ADPT Physio. It's
What a
it's
winner.
not like there's not enough branding around the place now to remind me. We are Unity Gym, the Unified Movement System, where we turn driven people into athletes. This week we're going deep on assessments, structural balance, and strength tests. This is a not to miss series. We love this series. We love talking about this series, and it comes really well off the back of last week's discussion about balance and the need for balance in your life, in your training. So first, before we get started, I'll ask, how is everyone?
Great.
If that's your radio voice, man, I don't want to know what radio shows you're listening to. Welcome to Yanni's Super Sounds.
How are you, Richie?
I'm good. Went to the beach a couple times.
Good.
Cracking days.
We're winning here. We're winning today. Yeah, we need to assess our performance a little bit more on the radio show, I think.
Assessment, yeah, that's right. But listen, before we dive in, I do want to give a big shout out to ADPT Physio. Thank you for everyone who's been jumping on and supporting the guys who have, startups are tough and they're cranking. They're absolutely blasting through. And thank you to everyone who's given them a Google review. If you've liked what Phil talks about, we're doing a full series next week on injury management. We're going to have Nilesh back on the show this Wednesday talking about athletic performance and development. If you like what these guys do, all the free content they give you guys, please give them a 5-star Google review. It helps them a lot through this initial phase of their startup.
And,
There you go.
And I'd just like to say that today's show is brought to you by our UMS Foundations Phase 1 program, which is the ultimate way to get started with us. If you want to know how we balance strength, flexibility, and fitness, actually, for the Foundations, just strength and flexibility into the one workout, then get it. You've got another, I think at this point, you've got 32 hours left to get it at an amazingly discounted rate. So jump into the UMS Movement Mastermind Facebook group where you can click the link at the top of the page and get it.
Awesome.
Yeah, some exciting physio things coming this week with Nilesh is going to be on the show again on Wednesday, and we're going to try and, in one show, tell you all the things you need to know to avoid injury and get out of injury and perform at your best. So we're really going to try and do like a great overview episode on Wednesday with Nilesh bringing in some more great nuggets of information, just like he did last week with the 100-point recovery system from professional sports. And then next week, I'm going to do a deep dive into each of those points, and really for all those physio nerds out there who just love to get a deep dive into all things that will save you from injury and pain long term. So
Beautiful.
Big things.
Now, we want to send some love. We want to send some love out to the podcast listeners. Absolutely crushing our goals there. Give us a 5-star review. We love you long time. It'll help us. We want to get that podcast growing to millions of people, millions and millions of people. A big shout out to everyone tuning in and bearing with us on our YouTube channel. We haven't posted a weekly workout for a long time. We are going to crank that up soon. We're just about ready to go. We got some great stuff coming. So lots of love to everyone on the YouTube channel. Smash the like button and send us some love back. And a very, very warm welcome to everyone tuning in and joining us on the UMS Movement Mastermind Facebook group. If you haven't already, jump over and join that group and jump into the discussion live. I can see we got some people on the stream. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from, and answer the question of the day. We want to know if you have some form of physical assessment system that you're using to level up, to make sure that your training is specific to your needs and you're not guessing. Because as we say here at Unity Gym, if you're not assessing, you're only guessing, and it's a recipe for disaster if you take your training seriously or your athletic performance seriously. So let us know, are you assessing, and what system are you using? We'd love to learn a little bit about it, and we'll get someone to type that up in the comments section as well. Let's kick this sucker off. Let's start with we're going to work from the inside out today. We're going to frame 4 reasons why structural imbalances in the body can become really problematic and raise the risk of injury, definitely affect your performance. And I'll just quickly frame those. First of all, we're going to be talking about joint stability, so imbalances between the stability systems and the systems that are moving the joint to create the movement that we rely on in athletic performance. And then we're going to talk about the structural imbalances between agonist-antagonist muscle groups. So think like chest and back is a really obvious example, or triceps and biceps, and how the relationship between those muscles can affect your performance if they're out of balance. Then we're going to talk about symmetry, limb symmetry imbalances from left to right side of your body. Classic example for performance is tennis players or players of a sport that swing in one direction only, or predominantly, like tennis players usually serve only on one side, and that can create huge structural imbalances from a symmetrical standpoint. And then finally, we're going to talk about, from the very, very outset, imbalances between things like upper body and lower body, legs and upper body. And that's a classic. The classic example is the dude who skips leg day and what that can do for overall physical performance. Mm-hmm. You don't want to end up like some of those sort of calisthenic superstars out there that look like they'd be better adapted to walking around on their hands than on their feet.
Or unlike tennis players who only swing one way, Richard does swing both ways. So anybody wants
you were hanging to get that out. For those of you listening to the podcast, you missed the stupid faces that we come up with when we're gagging to get a joke out that we think about, so get over and join the live chat.
Yeah,
so,
just sitting there itching.
So first of all, to start off, let's get Phil to explain very quickly in as simple terms as possible the meaning of joint glide, because that's going to build some context to where we start this discussion.
Yep, muscles are dumb. All they can do is contract. So when you have a big muscle like your pec, and you're doing a powerful pushing motion or a powerful punching motion, it doesn't kind of control in sort of 3D space. All it does is contract and relax. So if your pec is contracting, then your arm's going to swing forward. You're going to get into an abducted, horizontally adducted, and internally rotated position, partially flexed position. And what would also happen is your shoulder, the ball would pop out of the front of the socket, and if you just had a pec on a skeleton, that's what would happen. So it's really good that doesn't happen, but the only reason that is because we have all these other muscles and all these other passive structures that are supporting things in place. So that's why if you have a big muscle like your pec that's got real powerful ability to contract, you need to have other muscles that are similarly balanced to stop unwanted movement. And so when Yanni mentioned joint glide there, that's exactly what's happening. So for people on the video, as your that anterior glide is that kind of shoulder popping out of the socket thing. So, but that doesn't happen because we have rotator cuff muscles. It doesn't happen because we have basically opposite muscles that will put the brakes on it before that happens.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, and I reckon that this is one of the, we say this a lot, and people might be listening to this and going, yeah, that makes sense. And if you're not at that point yet, then really tune in, because it's really, really important. But I think even as a coach, even as a personal trainer, I'm still learning more and more and more about the critical importance of this, which is, indicated by injuries that I've had of recent times. So even somebody at my level of education and with experience, this is something that we don't always get right, and it's something that you really, really need to, for me, I find that I just keep looking on a weekly and monthly basis as to what's my training looking like and how balanced is it, and it's good when you understand this, because you can very quickly easily go, well, hang on a minute, I've just done X, Y, and Z, which involved pushing, and I only did A that involved pulling. Oh, I'm going to need to balance that out.
And where this becomes so important for injury risk is it's not usually it's very rare that you'll actually dislocate your shoulder. So don't start to think that you're going to be really fragile. But what usually happens is you start to aggravate passive structures. So again, passive structures are anything that you can't contract. They're just sort of the static scaffolding of your body. So it's going to be your bones, your cartilage, your ligaments. So and in this case, with your shoulder, you have your labrum in there, which is the injury that Rad's had before, and you have at the front you have the actual tendon of your bicep that is also acting as a physical barrier. So although a tendon is kind of typically more an active structure, the place it sits means that it's sort of there as like a static stop point for your shoulder coming forward. So and that can be really aggravating. And anyone who's got pain while pushing and sharp pain in the front of their shoulder will pretty much everyone I know who's ever trained in a gym has had that, and that's just a really good example of that anterior glide causing like some significant pain. And if you just had the active control of your structures, then you wouldn't get that pain. So it just should really highlight like that having that dynamic scaffolding, the dynamic active structures, keeping the ball in the middle of the socket and stopping joints gliding is just such a key thing for performance and injury. And
if you can put that down, if you listen to that and it still bewildered you, for Yanni, Richard and I are training people that come to our gym that say to us, I've got like aches and pains and this happens when I do that. Just by doing a balance between pushing and pulling movements in our program irons out a lot of old aches and pains in a lot of people. For a lot of people, they'll just do our program and 2 or 3 weeks later, they're like, oh my God, I don't have these aches and pains in my shoulders anymore when I do this movement or whatever. Yeah. So it is so powerful to understand the importance of this.
And so it's just to be really clear, it's not just ball and socket joints, it's not just shoulders. So in your knee, which is obviously a very different joint to your shoulder, like your kind of passive structure that people would kind of understand are your ACL and PCL, and then your MCL and LCL. So they're all the ligaments that hold the structure together. But Yanni's on an ACL injury, and the amount of hamstring rehab you have to do in that, the amount of quad strengthening, the amount of like calf strength, like you have to do so much strength around there because your calves, your quads, and your hamstrings are all adding that active dynamic stability to the system, which then deloads your passive structures like your ACL, helping it heal and be resilient long term. So just be really clear, it's not just a ball and socket thing, it's every joint you need that active control and support.
Yep, that's right. And since having my ACL reconstruction and my knee operated on, it wasn't just my ACL, but that was probably the most obvious because that was a complete, is it a grade 3 tear when it's completely severed? Yeah. I looked into it and did a fair bit of research, and there are a lot of athletes who have ACL tears now who don't actually get it reconstructed. They just focus on developing the strength of their hamstrings and their semimembranosus, or
that's one of your hamstrings. So yep.
Semitendinosus. Well, one of the tendons it's positioned in a way, the origin insertion, that it kind of it creates that stability mechanism that the ACL used to do if you develop enough strength in it. So yeah, it's interesting to see that when we talk about the importance of these deeper muscle systems, that is not to say that you should just run off in a direction developing, your external rotation strength and think that you're going to be totally fine swinging a tennis racket or something like that, or throwing a ball. The outer unit, the bigger muscles that you do see, play a huge role in this, but it's very, very important that you train those in balance too, because they can become a real asset, but they can also become a liability. And why don't we take that to the discussion now, which is what happens when you do overdevelop a system of muscles that create one side of the contraction or the joint movement without balancing the opposing side. So the classic example that I like to think about is horizontal push-pull or vertical push-pull patterns, because they're very obvious to explain. So let's, for simplicity's sake, we'll focus today on the horizontal push-pull pattern and maybe knee flexion extension or something like that.
Yeah, well, I think Yanni, your example of your boxing days, when back in the day when you just did a lot of boxing and a lot of pec work, and that's a really good example with boxers. But the kind of typical ones you see in the gym are the for powerlifters who, like, you are competing in your bench press, but you're not competing in your horizontal row. So it's very easy to then, if you look at people's training, they'll just absolutely blast the bench press, but without then matching it out with your your horizontal pull as well. So I think that's like kind of the most clear example of how you could really develop some solid sort of imbalance in your shoulder that will lead to long-term stability issues. And I think like, a good example of how this affects performance as well is with Bass, who we talk about quite a lot, who's a powerlifting coach, with people who are really big bench pressers and come to him to get a better bench. What he does is gets them like doubling down on their pulling, leaves the bench, like just kind of maintenance on the bench, and then like they'll generally get a better bench just from really maxing out some pulling to restore a bit more balance, because the body really does like to shut down movements if it's
being overdeveloped,
if it's unstable.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've actually met a handful of powerlifters who competed really competitively for a very brief amount of time, and then their careers were over effectively because they create this insane imbalance. They don't really have the programming structure down pat. They don't either, whether it's lack of education or laziness, and I met this guy. I'm not going to name any names because he's probably still in the industry, and he was a bit of a dick anyway. But anyway, and I had a conversation with him. He actually was a nutritionist, and he was insanely overweight and looked like one of the most unhealthy people I've ever met. So I don't know how that works out. But and I remember talking to him about how he could no longer. He was having a hip labrum repair, and it went, and it had happened 3 or 4 times, and he got to the point where he can no longer. All he could compete in was bench press. He couldn't squat or deadlift anymore. And when I used to talk to him about, was he ever doing anything like remedial or prehab or single leg or stability, and he just would shut it down like, it's all a waste of time, total waste of time. And he'd slam me for, wasting people's time in doing structural balance stuff and all this. And this is a guy who could now no longer squat or deadlift. And I kind of feel like he gave up the right to to comment on something that he believes he knew a lot about. And he goes, but and I called him out on it once, and he said, well, what do you squat? And I said, I don't know, my max is about 180 kilos. He goes, well, my max was 240. And I said, it was. When did you squat anything above your own body weight? And he goes, I told you I can't squat anymore because my hips are fucked. And I'm like, do you not hear what you're saying? It's just bizarre. And I've met people with the same thing on powerlifters on their bench press. They used to have a 300 kilo bench press, but they can't bench anymore because they fucked their shoulders. And
in all honesty, that is one of the greatest driving forces behind the creation of the UMS for all of us, because we were. It was really Yanni and I are the oldest people in this room here, and we were feeling the effects of aging, and we were starting to feel like, wow, our bodies are breaking down, and we need to understand why, and we need to make changes rather than doing what you just described, which is, I'm just going to keep going this way until and something magical will happen and turn it around. And if we come back to the point of this show, that is when the idea of assessments is critical, because when you assess, if you do proper assessments, you reveal these imbalances, and you should then go, whoa, look at this, I better change something about the way I'm doing things, rather than just, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing,
Yeah, 100%.
And just on the horizontal push-pull shoulder example that I was talking about before, it's really like it can seem quite simplistic to think like, okay, we'll like balance out, push and pull, but it's really important to then understand sort of a bit deeper into the anatomy. So when you think about push and pull, you've got your pecs as being your major sort of pushing muscles, then you've got your lats as being the major pulling muscles. And when you think about what the actions of both of those muscles are, they both have their pulling and pushing actions, but they both have internal rotation in common. So it's really like important to see then that there's now these like big muscles that have a huge sort of ability to cause internal rotation. As you strengthen both of them, you're going to have more internal rotation sort of built into that system. And so you've then got to think, okay, now I've got to think like, do I have adequate external rotation force? So you're always trying to think about that balance between both, and so that's why with the assessment structures and the training in your gym as well, there's a good focus on then developing that external rotation force as well. So that's where this stuff, like, it can seem really simple, but then you can also go a bit deeper.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and we're going to go really deep into the exact assessments that we have. We're going to talk about industry standards on Thursday, and then we're going to talk about UMS standards on Friday. And there's a reason why we don't test for internal rotation isolation, but we do test for external rotation isolation. And Phil just summed it up perfectly there. Now, I don't want to go into that in too much detail just yet, because we are going to talk about that and reveal all of that on Thursday and Friday. And there are a few nuances, but we like to think of, developing a 1-to-1 ratio of horizontal push, horizontal pull. The time where these numbers, where these ratios, where these benchmarks and standards differ is depending on what coach and what athlete they're training. If you're training a rower, a professional rower, an Olympic standard rower, then of course you're going to probably prioritize or expect a better row, a better pull strength than push strength, and then it changes that dynamic a little bit. But for us, because we're creating the perfect balance, as we spoke about last week, we're creating a foundation for you to be able to deploy into just about any sport. Then we want it to be as close as possible to 1-to-1 push-pull and things like that. And it works incredibly well. We'll talk about more of that. In the rest of the week.
On that, like for someone who may be listening who's really into powerlifting, they might think like, oh, okay, I've like got this bench press that's 200 kilos. There's no way I'm going to get like a bent over horizontal row at 200 kilos or whatever. But it's important to think that like with these 1-to-1 ratios, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the same 1 RM. You might have like a 1 RM in a bench press, then a 5 RM that's kind of an equivalent in that, because generally in powerlifting it's more important to have really good isometric pulling strength to be able to hold with a deadlift and to be able to have the stability during a bench press. So it does get, again, quite nuanced in these sort of ways. That's
exactly right. And it has to be specific to the sport that you're training for, So let's talk a little bit now about symmetry. Symmetry between left and right side and what can happen when that goes out of whack, because this is where you start to really expose your body to injury, and I've personally trained a couple of retired professional tennis players in my day who started to run into problems like where their body was starting to literally cause the development of their muscles was starting to cause scoliosis, and I don't know what it's called. Is it called dominant side scoliosis?
Sorts of different terms.
But basically, what happens is the body develops to such a degree on one side that it starts to sort of pull, and without the right recovery, without the right maintenance, stretching, flexibility, mobility, it can kind of cause enough tension that it causes the posture to change and adapt. And that can become quite painful. It can expose you to more injury risk, more unnecessary sort of wear and tear in the joints and things like that. And it's a sacrifice that a lot of professional athletes make. We spoke about this last week. Professional athletes aren't necessarily always healthy. We do like to put them on that pedestal and assume that an athlete, because of the sheer amount of exercise they're doing, is healthy, and we emulate them, but often they are making huge sacrifices to their health, because remember, the true meaning of health is the absence of illness or injury. And most athletes are not absent of injury. We actually had a great conversation with an ex-professional rugby league player here who was training, and he had retired from professional sport, did his last 4 years playing rugby union overseas to make a bit of money, bank a bit of cash, and then he came back and he said, as a professional rugby league player, the only game you ever play uninjured is your first game. You remember Craig saying that? And from that point on, you are managing injuries. And I actually spoke to Nilesh about this, who is a performance physiotherapist for the GWS Giants still today. He only works here 2 days a week. And he was saying the same thing. He said, it's just a constant management of injuries for the professional players. There's none of them that aren't injured, know. And so when you think about that, considering the meaning of the word health, athletes aren't healthy,
And I've been typing away here trying to find a good example of this. But one of the the kind of Rafael Nadal really dense right arm is a well-known sort of thing. How he's got like a big beefy arm and
he looks like a crab.
Yeah, he looks like a crab.
One of those crabs with
a really interesting one is in baseball players, in pitchers, humeral retroversion is something that develops as you get into pitching a lot, which basically you start to get a backwards twist in your humerus itself, which allows for a larger amount of external rotation. And so you see some of the. I'll post a little.
Oh man, you see some of those pictures.
I'm posting a little.
It's like back.
Yeah.
So for anyone who's watching the UMS online Mastermind Live, I'll just put a little post here, a link
Picture.
here. So have a look there, and you see these guys. Their arms are like twisted all the way back, and so what's actually happened there is because they've just pitched through their developing years, they've actually developed a twist in their humerus, which means that they'll never be able to get the same amount of internal rotation, but they've got the same amount of total range, but it's so heavily weighted towards external rotation because of the way that they've developed. So I think it's just a really good example of how, you know, there are sort of some beneficial sporting performance like adaptations that happen, but, you know, whether that then causes some health issues down the line is
that's right.
is a whole
Absolutely.
so yeah, click on that link and have a look because it's pretty sort of fascinating.
It's crazy. It's crazy
stuff there. So.
Yeah, so that's the need for symmetry, and this is the thing, and we're going to talk about this a lot more tomorrow. But the need for understanding that when you train at the gym, when you go to your gym, you employ a coach or a personal trainer or an exercise physiologist or a sports exercise scientist. If you're lucky enough to get someone like Phil or Nilesh, who's also a physiotherapist, you know, if you're not an athlete who's training for a specific sport, and even if you are, you want to be training in a way that is balancing your body, ironing out these structural imbalances over time. It's never going to happen immediately, and I don't recommend that you stop training just to focus on an imbalance, because you probably create something else. You keep progressing on all of your strength and everything, but you just want to be building into your program some form of assessment system that is continually either benchmarking where you're at now so that you can assess your progress, but also steering you in a direction that is of balance. You know, we have a term at Unity Gym, your body balance score. You know, where do you sit? And it's taking into consideration the stability systems versus the movement systems. It's taking into consideration the opposing muscle systems in every joint. It's taking into consideration the symmetry of your body from left to right side. And then finally, and arguably the most important for those who are interested in aesthetically driven training, it's taking into consideration your top and bottom half, you know, your legs in comparison to your upper body. And naturally, if you're into certain sports or hobbies or passions like calisthenics, where you're really dominant in your upper body, there is still a real need from an overall health perspective to be developing your lower body. You know, you do not want to end up one of those people who would get blown over by a strong wind, because you know, the upper body works as a sail to catch the wind because of the ginormous lats that you've got and traps, and the lower body is just not there to support you, because guess what you're going to rely on in a later, you can be the world's strongest bench presser, but if you can't squat your body weight and some, as you age, that's going to become a limiting factor in whether you can get up and down, how mobile you are, whether you can get up and down a set of stairs, whether you can get in and out of a chair, whether you can squat down and play with your grandkids, you know, on the floor. Like, these things are super duper important, and you don't want to be the dude or the girl who skips leg day. You know, it's really not something that we would recommend. So, you know, the way we design UMS, it is although we have a goal to sort of encourage people to find a sport that they can demonstrate their physical attributes in, and if they don't have something, we steer them into calisthenics, because it's such a rewarding way to ignite your intrinsic motivation and keep you training, untether you from gyms, all sorts of fancy things that we like to do. But we still have a huge emphasis on lower body training here. You know, we twice a week we're doing lower body training, and I feel like that's something that really shouldn't be overlooked in someone's program. You know.
Totally. I just want to have a quick little rant about imbalances and injury identity, because this is a real thing that I come across in a big way in my physio world. Like seeing patients who are just so hung up on imbalances that becomes like pathological.
Yeah.
Where basically that then stops them from doing things because they're so worried about certain imbalances. So I think it's a really important like tool to use assessments to, like, you know, have a look at ways that you can improve, but it should never mean that you should like stop doing things entirely. It might mean that you slow down, like, you know, trying to progress on certain elements, but you're always wanting to keep a, you know, well balanced, structured training together, and don't use don't get too hung up on imbalances.
You said something before that really is important that we brushed over very quickly, which is what Bass does. You know, if he gets a guy who's already an insanely, and I've watched this on because we're friends and I follow him on social and stuff, he'll get someone who comes in who's already got a 200 kilogram bench press and take them to a 260 kilogram bench press in a matter of months. And you said it very clearly before. He will just do maintenance bench pressing for a while to bring up their pulling and shoulder stability. And I know that Bass also works on rotator cuff stability and things like that. He doesn't stop bench pressing if he finds that they can't row anywhere near what they should be able to row. He maintains the bench press. They still do it every week, you know. And that's something really, really important to take into consideration. You know, when we assess someone at Unity Gym and we find an imbalance, it doesn't matter how severe that imbalance is, they don't stop everything to work on that imbalance. We just customize the program so that we make sure that the imbalance is taken care of during their workouts, you know, and they're focusing on that. And from time to time, if someone who's managing something that's been going for a long time or it's affected their posture, we might give them a little bit of additional homework to do, but it certainly doesn't interfere with their workout. You know, it doesn't. It just helps direct the workout. It helps to customize the workout. You know, we're going to reveal exactly how we do that at the end of the week.
Any closing thoughts, Rad, before we get to Tim Hughes' comment here?
Yeah, let's give some love to everyone in the group who's commenting.
I just think I feel like I just wasted so much time throughout my life, but how can you really say that? Because, you know, everything that you did led you to where you are now, of course. But before having access to the information that we now just give out on these shows, I just really didn't get this concept, and I really didn't understand how much simpler it is on a, you know, if you just remove the complexity and just sort of dull it down and just work on this balance stuff, like the amazing results that you can produce. And I always thought that there was like some magic solution to something, to the issues that I had in my body that I needed to find, and it turns out that it was a lot simpler than I thought it was. You know, if you just learn to assess an imbalance and go, oh, okay, there's an imbalance, let's work on that a little bit. But by doing what you guys just said there, not like neglecting your strengths, just adding in some stuff to bring your imbalance up to your strength, and that's just done wonders for me.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you want to go through the comments and?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got.
Hello, Daljit, and also Lucio, Roy Stern.
Yeah.
Let us know if you're on the stream, guys. I know we've got a bunch of people watching live. We'd love to know where you are. Like Kurt Dyer, tuned in over here in New Zealand, loving the in-depth analysis and always enjoy the wealth of knowledge you are willing to share. Keep it up, guys. That's
Thanks,
really
Kurt.
amazing,
That's
Kurt.
awesome,
Thank
mate.
you.
Tim Hughes is saying, hi all. I had an exercise physiologist at the local gym and used the FMS to assess my body.
Formerly FMS. Oh, is that the real
He's talking about the
functional movement screening?
And for those of you that want to know why we changed from the foundation movement system FMS to the UMS, that's why.
Yeah.
That right there is why. It was something, this is Tim again, he's saying, it was something that was very interesting, but I didn't have the time, motivation to keep following the prescribed exercises to fix the imbalances. Thank God I have more motivation to get serious about the UMS. And you know what you've said there, Tim, is actually really, really important, because we want to highlight this. You know, a system is only as good as it's going to keep you engaged to do. Like there are systems out there that on paper are really, really amazing, and you can't fault them on paper. But they haven't, the people behind it or the community behind it hasn't found a way to motivate people to actually do it. Yeah. And that's been a real driving force within the UMS. And there's elements of the UMS that I would definitely say thanks to me. And there's elements of it that are thanks to Phil and thanks to Richard and thanks to Yanni. And this is definitely some of Yanni's magic. Yanni is somebody that's always, he keeps looking at it saying, how are we going to get people to engage with this? What are we going to do to make people actually do this?
I've done the functional movement screening course. I did a two-day
done the course.
Workshop.
Done a bit of it.
And it's so thorough. It's not as thorough as Paul Check's whatever it was called. Paul Check's assessments that I used to do took 6 days to get through, 6 hours. functional movement screening, you can kind of do it in a couple of
pretty quick,
hours.
yeah.
It's very thorough though, look, yeah, like we're going to talk about this. I'm not going to go deep into this because we'll waste time, but we're going to talk
It's
about
the
on
paralysis by analysis
Thursday
thing, right?
why we don't assess people when they set foot in Unity Gym, why we actually delay the assessment process and initially focus on just improving technique in the 15 foundation movements first, because you can get analysis paralysis from assessments, especially if they're too good,
And I did the FMS as a patient, seeing a physio, and I was just kind of pissed off because I was like, oh, I just didn't know how to do the thing, and if I just did it like one more time, like I just wanted to be fine, but like
yeah, big time.
Yeah, so as I didn't find it particularly useful, but anyway, we'll go into that another day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we're going to bring this in for a landing. Thank you so much for joining us. For everyone joining us live, thank you very, very much. This is going to be an epic week. I'm very, very excited about it. We're going to split the week up, as we said, with Nilesh on the show, going real deep in athletic performance and injury management, and essentially teach you guys how to avoid ever needing to go see a physio.
That's the plan.
That's our plan this week, and I can't wait to share exactly what we're doing at Unity Gym right now, because it's getting some amazing results. We're going to reveal all, so stay tuned.
Yeah, and guys who are watching live, or if you are listening to it later, like, please do send us through questions. I feel like there's been a bit of a drop off in questions lately. People saying hi and giving a few encouraging comments, which is so nice. But we're really here, like Kurt sort of said, like we enjoy doing this stuff and we want to help you out as much as possible. So if you do have any questions, we can help you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to start kicking off our weekly workouts for the YouTube channel again soon. And if you get a good question in, we may just turn it into an actual video, produced video. So keep it up, guys. We'll see you soon.
See ya.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, it's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.